Shalom, I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik, and welcome to Faith to Faith. No matter what our differences may be, it is our faith that hopefully brings us together to do great things. My guest today is Rabbi Ammiel Hirsch, the senior rabbi of the Stephen Wise Free Synagogue in New York City. Since his arrival in 2004, Stephen Wise has grown rapidly, while Rabbi Hirsch introduced to his congregation dramatic changes in worship, ritual, and education. Prior to his arrival at Stephen Wise, he served for 12 years as executive director of the Association of Reform Zionists of America, the Israel arm of the North American Reform Movement. An accomplished teacher, dynamic public speaker, lawyer, Rabbi Hirsch co-authored the widely acclaimed book, One People, Two Worlds, a Reform rabbi and an Orthodox rabbi explore the issues that divide them. He has served on numerous boards of national and international Jewish organizations, including the Jewish Agency for Israel and the World Zionist Organization, and currently is an officer of the New York Board of Rabbis and a member of the Partnership of Faith, an interfaith body of interreligious leaders. As both a friend and a colleague, it is my pleasure to welcome Rabbi Ammiel Hirsch. Rabbi, after reading that introduction, there's no time left for the interview.
I'm yours every week. Just invite me every week, as long as you promise to do that introduction.
So the question, which I'm sure you're asked, is why does it work so well at Stephen Wise? You know, we live at a time when there are a number of synagogues undergoing declines, and yet your synagogue growth. What are you doing that is having this kind of major impact on the community?
First of all, I'm not entirely sure that I know the answer to that. I think part of it is there's just simply a lot of Jews where we are. But having said that, we were about a third of the size before I came. So I do think there's a correlation between what we're doing and our growth. We wanted to focus on, we had specific central messages that we wanted to focus on and values that we wanted to represent. We felt that we were in a certain post-denominational world, so we wanted to appeal to the broadest possible group of Jews, from non-affiliated all the way to halachic Jews, those at least who could pray in a Reform synagogue, in a non-halachic synagogue on Shabbat. We completely revolutionized the worship. Our worship doesn't look hardly like anything that exists now in the Reform movement. We bet on the notion that our people would take to Hebrew. Hebrew was fundamental to us, and that had, to the best of our knowledge, never been the case in any Reform synagogue, that the entire Shabbat service, including the B'nai Mitzvahs on Saturday morning, were going to be in Hebrew. We analyzed the idea of worship. We included music as a central component to that. And of course, that led us to a discussion on what type of music. And we wanted to have music that was accessible, but at the same time took people back to Sinai, that sounded authentically Jewish, which is a very hard thing to do. We have a genius cantor, which actually the Shulchan Aruch says that if you only have enough money in the synagogue, either for a rabbi or for a cantor, who should the community select? And the answer is, I like to tell my cantor this, cantor singer, the answer is that by and large, you should select the cantor.
It was a rabbi who said that as well, right? It was a rabbi who recommended getting the cantor first, though.
The reason is because cantors are the people in the synagogue that open the gates of prayer and allow for the gates of heaven to be accessed. There is one exception, by the way, in the Shulchan Aruch. You should hire a rabbi instead of a cantor if the rabbi is a great rabbi.
Well, it looks like at Stephen Wise they've done it all. But you know, you look at the Pew study and you see the rapid rise of non-affiliation. A lot of people are opting not to join at all. Not just synagogues, just not joining organizations. And yet at Stephen Wise, you've been able to attract them. I think one of the secrets, it's not really a secret, go on the website, there are so many different avenues for connection. I think what you're saying to people is there's no one size fits all. There's no one way to be Jewish. We have something that may work for you that is different from what you haven't experienced before.
Yes, that's for sure. And going back to the first question that you asked, we believe completely in the centrality of the synagogue for the future of Jewish continuity in the United States. In Israel, one could make an argument that religion plays a different role and there's Jewish continuity in Israel without Jews having to go to synagogue. But outside of Israel, the synagogue is the center of Jewish life. There is no institution that can replace the synagogue. There are institutions that obviously play critical roles and can augment the synagogue in terms of Jewish continuity. But the central institution of Jewish life outside of Israel is the synagogue. That means that, one, the synagogue itself has to see itself in that way and has to have that kind of self-image of we're the heart of the future of American Jewry. The second thing that we assumed is that given that we believed that, we needed to find partners in the Jewish community who believed that as well. And that was part of the philanthropic Jewish community. And we went to the philanthropic Jewish community and said, if you're worried about Jewish continuity, there are a bunch of other things that the Jewish people have to worry about. But Jewish continuity perhaps is the central challenge of our times outside of Israel. And if you're worried about that, you need to invest in synagogues. Now, you might not like the way synagogues are operating at this point. We, frankly, have a lot of criticism as well. So help us to become better, but invest in us and hold our feet to the fire and make sure that we're doing a good job. So we went outside of our synagogue and we appealed to philanthropies and foundations with that message. And we found partners who have invested in us in the tune of millions of dollars, because it's not even necessarily that they're connected to our synagogue, but they're convinced of the same message. If you were to ask me what are the key institutions of Jewish life that we need to invest in, and this is a question of financial priorities, and you can kind of look and see where the Jewish community spends its money and then compare whether we're spending our money wisely. Again, if the issue is Jewish continuity, in my view, outside the Orthodox community, there are three institutions. The Orthodox community has a lot of other problems, but Jewish continuity is not one of them. Jewish schools, Jewish summer camps, synagogues. The three S's.
Three S's.
That's what we need to invest in.
Transformative experiences.
Jewish continuity.
One of the things I've found very intriguing about you is when I listen to some of your sermons, and I recommend people do that by going on the website, you talk about Israel quite a bit. And yet you know there are some who are told or who feel, don't talk too much about Israel because it generates all kinds of different points of view. Stay safe. Don't discuss it. You don't opt for that path.
How can you not talk about Israel if you're a rabbi? Israel is, the center of contemporary Jewish life. It goes to the heart of the matter for us.
And you're not afraid to take a stand.
Rabbis in general should not be afraid to take a stand. Now, that's a complicated issue. I'm the rabbi of the Stephen Wise Free Synagogue. It was set up by Stephen Wise to represent the idea of freedom of the pulpit and freedom of the pew as well. And so our synagogue takes that very seriously. The principle is easier said than done. As we see, and the implication of your question is that people don't like to hear views from the pulpit that are at odds with what they believe, especially
stay away from
if they
controversy.
hear it frequently over and over.
Safe areas, not too controversial. People sometimes think you're going to be popular, you're going to be liked if you avoid the controversial zones. And the truth is, people respect you when they know you stand for something.
I think that's right. First of all, while I understand the coolness related to Israel, even in the rabbinic class, it's apparently that perspective is increasing as the years go by, and even the rabbinical schools are churning out people who have a complicated relationship with Israel. Nonetheless, I think rabbis need to uphold the central values of contemporary Judaism, and at the heart of that is support of the Jewish people and the Jewish state. It doesn't mean uncritical support, and rabbis especially should feel free to speak their mind. How they do that, by the way, is a question that goes to how we do our jobs as rabbis. That is, none of us in any situation says everything that's on our minds unfiltered Even at home, we don't do that. So it's not simply a question of rabbis getting up on the bima and saying whatever it is that comes into their mind in any manner. But at the same time, rabbis should uphold and defend the values that they believe in, because we understand our role as receiving some communication, some message from God, some essence of Judaism that is filtered through us. And what our understanding of that is, we have an obligation to communicate to the people, even if the messages coming from certain pulpits are not messages that I uphold.
You said something very interesting before: freedom of the pulpit, which we understand, freedom of the pew. In other words, there's an opportunity for congregants to say, Rabbi, while I respect what you're saying, I disagree with what you're saying. That atmosphere also is at Stephen Wise, isn't it?
Absolutely. First of all, in every congregation, our people are going to tell us what they think, whether we solicit their views or not. That's a positive thing. That's a good thing. Actually, one of the challenges of being a rabbi is that we do not receive enough feedback and information from the community. And that's a fundamental part of being a leader. You know, Abraham Lincoln used to conduct what he called regular public opinion baths,
right,
where he invited Americans into the White House, and he just simply heard what was on their minds, because he felt that that made him a better public leader. So we have to be strong enough and open enough to receive that. But at the same time, you know, Rabbi Stephen Wise, in defining freedom of the pew, said, I offer the same freedom that I take myself from the pulpit. Anybody who wants to leave is free to leave.
Well, it obviously has worked very well for you. You know, it's very troubling. You look at college campuses today, and you see a number of Jewish kids who are just not involved. They're apathetic. You know, someone said Jews who stand for nothing is the growing group, threatens the survival. These are our kids. We lost them. Something happened post bar bat mitzvah, post confirmation years. Do you have any thoughts as to why they're out there not, continuing that connection which they had when they were much younger, or maybe the connection really wasn't there?
Well, I think this goes to really central questions of contemporary American Jewish life. Some of the trends that the headwinds that we're encountering are simply way beyond our capacity to fully address. It goes to the nature of Western civilization, the diminution of the pull of religion, frankly, the lessening of ethnic peoplehood ties, national ties. So all of that is at play, and it doesn't let us off the hook, but at the same time we have to acknowledge that we're part of a context that is very difficult for us, and it doesn't look like it's getting better. If anything, these trends are intensifying. At the same time, that's simply part of the context. That's not an excuse for us to lose Jews. We in the synagogue now are about to launch a very aggressive, very comprehensive teen program that'll be open to all of the teens in New York City, all those other teens who have left their congregations too. And we expect to embrace hundreds of teens over this 5-year period from 13 to 18. And we're going to train them, one, in Judaism. That's the essence of it, that they need to be instilled with a Jewish neshama. 2, we're going to expect to be able to produce a leadership cadre, both in terms of professional and future lay leaders. And 3, specifically, I am concerned about Israel on campus, and we're going to have a specific track that takes kids at age 13 years old and puts them through 5 years of intensive Zionist education and practical leadership skills, so that when they get to college, they're the ones who are going to be the leading forces on campus.
It's interesting you say that, because a friend of mine recently mentioned to me that he feels part of the problem has been, over the years, we as leaders stressed tikkun olam, repairing the world, at the expense of our own people, our own family, that we were so committed to doing for others in so many different places. And of course, we're mandated to do that, the stranger, the outsider, but yet don't overlook your own family. Do you think there's merit to that kind of statement?
I do. You know, both go hand in hand, and they really can't be separated in Judaism. What we understand now as tikkun olam, it is not necessarily the original meaning, but what we understand of tikkun olam, that is universalistic aspirations through the particularism of the Jewish people, is fundamental to Judaism. And universalism cannot be separated from particularism. Having said that, at different points in Jewish history, there are different challenges which require the Jewish community to place different emphases on the totality of values that constitute Judaism. And there might be an argument to be made that in some places in the Jewish community, the values of universalism are disproportionate to people's understanding of Jewish peoplehood. But I would say the same thing in other parts of the Jewish community. There are parts of the Jewish community that think nothing of the world and think only of themselves. And when I say themselves, not even only of the Jews, but only of their narrow Jewish community. So all of us have work to do to be able to, one, understand the totality of Jewish values, but two, place the right emphasis at the right time.
Yeah, look at Abraham, look at Moses. These were people Abraham who fought on behalf of the city, Sodom and Gomorrah, and yet, first Jew, proud of his own heritage. Moses, who saw an Egyptian and Jew fighting with each other, saw an injustice, intervened, and yet the presenter of the Decalogue. So you have this kind of dual responsibility. We need to, you know.
Totally,
yeah.
totally. A Jewish community that looks exclusively inwards is contrary to everything we know about Judaism from the very first words that God speaks to Abraham. The purpose of Abraham's selection was so that he would bring blessing to all the families of the earth.
Let's talk about what's going on today in Europe. We have this well-known pronouncement, never again. And we were committed to the prevention of any horror against any people after the Holocaust. You look around Europe today, anti-Semitism, anti-Christianity, we see Muslims who've been slaughtered. What happened?
First of all, Europe is like that. Europe has been saturated with thousands of years of anti-Semitism. If you travel around Europe, and I take missions to Europe as often as I can for our synagogue because it's an important part of Jewish identity. Really, with all of the glory of Judaism in Europe, and there were periods of absolute great accomplishment, at the same time, Europe is a cemetery for the Jews. Anti-Semitism, European anti-Semitism is not a new phenomenon. The interesting point, and by the way, what Prime Minister Netanyahu has been recently talking about, urging the Jews of Europe to come to Israel, is also not new. That was characteristic of Zionist leaders from the very beginning also, and the critique of Zionist leaders who delivered that message to world Jewry was also the same. So what we're seeing is it might be different in detail, but in the broader scheme of things, what we're seeing are the same trends that we've seen for a long time. People have a tendency to think, that history is different because they're alive now. But we're part of a historical context, and these historical trends unfold over centuries and even millennia. The interesting question about Israel is, is there a connection between the coldness of many Western European governments on a policy level to Israel and anti-Semitism? What explains the difference of Western European governments' approaches to Israel and the American government approach to Israel? And does that impact in some significant ways on the population? That is it not only from the population to the government? Are they reflecting the views of the population? But is the government itself, through its own actions and its own coldness and lack of sympathy for Israel's issues, the kind of issues that no European government has to face, and only now are beginning to face in terms of not existential threats, but the terrorist threat? Is there a connection between that and further hardening their own populations in anti-Semitic content?
Interesting. But aren't we also seeing that while anti-Semitism or this hatred of the Jew starts with the Jew, it doesn't stop with the Jew. You have Christians who've been attacked. We've had recent atrocities, right, against Christians, not because of Israel, completely unrelated. How does one explain that? It's not, anti-Semitism is no longer this neatly compartmentalized, kind of disease. It spreads.
Well, it never was compartmentalized. It was more like the canary in the mine, right, warning about sicknesses at the heart of societies, and particularly of concern for us is at the heart of Western societies. And once the Jews start talking about leaving, you know that there's something rotten in these kingdoms. That should be of great concern to all of us who care about Western civilization. And Europe is the cradle of Western civilization.
Didn't one of the French leaders simply say that France without Jews is not going to be France? That if we lose Jews, and I think he was also saying that Jews start leaving, others are going to contemplate doing the same thing, and then you lose that whole, the Enlightenment and all of those values of the Enlightenment.
But what you have here, one of the lessons that I think the Zionists were right about that. And we see this over and over again, and you look at the atrocities happening around the world and how many people are slaughtered, butchered by animals, some of whom claim to speak in the name of the Almighty One. One of the key lessons is that unless it happens to you, people really don't care all that much. And so you have an obligation, first and foremost, to take care of your own defense. Now, no person is an island entirely unto themselves, and no nation can go at it alone. So it's a complicated question of international relations and diplomacy. Having said that, nobody's going to care about your own security more than yourself. Right. And unless and until it happens to you, terror on the streets of Paris, you tend to have a lack of sympathy for terror on the streets of Tel Aviv. And what we saw, one of the disconcerting signs that we saw in the recent attacks in Europe and in France, is an effort to distinguish between terror when it occurs on the streets of France is somehow different and is rooted in different phenomena than terror in Tel Aviv. And therefore, the French can continue with this attitude that, well, if there's terror on the streets of Tel Aviv, it must be Israel's fault. If there's terror in the streets of Paris, it must be their fault. Because after all, who wouldn't love the French?
Yeah. Let's talk about something that is also a serious challenge for us. We've made great strides in relations with Jews and non-Jews. How about Jews and Jews? You wrote a book, Orthodox Reform Rabbi. Why should that be so groundbreaking? Why should that be so novel? Why don't we have these kinds of discussions? And I think we're doing, I love the New York Board of Rabbis, we take it for granted, but in other places it's not so commonplace.
I lament that. I do my best. If you believe in the central concept of Judaism being Klal Yisrael, the totality of the Jewish people, the centrality of the covenant of the Jewish people between God and between each other, you have an obligation to act as if we are in covenant with each other. All Jews are responsible one for the other. And you have an obligation not only to pay lip service to that, but to actually live those values. And those values have to mean something in terms of how you spend your day, how the community prioritizes its agenda, how it spends money, and what it does. So I was very happy to write a book with an Orthodox rabbinic colleague. In fact, Orthodox is maybe even an understatement, because he's a great Haredi Talmudic scholar, which was a great honor for me. We spent a year and a half working on this. From my perspective, it wasn't that, I don't think rabbis tend to write bestsellers, and that wasn't really the idea. The idea was to express and manifest the values that I think are central to Judaism, which is the centrality of the Jewish people.
And it says a lot about him, that he was ready to write the book with you as well.
I can tell you one thing. Based on the reaction, if you remember the reaction, there was a rabbinic ruling in the community that essentially forbade him from continuing on the book tour and from buying the books. And so based on the reaction to that book, I don't think it's likely to happen again. No. So if you want to know how these two rabbis talk to each other, this is the book. There's not going to be another book.
Let me just say this to you. I look at you, I look at your congregation, and I recognize you are a door opener. People come through the synagogue, through a house of worship, through different doors. Historically, there was one door for those who were mourners and one door for those who were coming for a wedding. You have so many different doors. And I just commend you because you're an inspiration not only to your colleagues, but to future colleagues, to those contemplating entering the clergy. They see you, they say, I want to be like him. I think that's a great tribute when someone says, I want to be like him. So, Rabbi Ammiel Hirsch, a great honor to have you with us today. Remember, we may have different faiths, we may have different faces, but above all, we must see each other as members of one human family. A great Jewish sage said, if you believe it can be broken, then know it can also be fixed. When we speak faith to faith, we know we can find the right way to fix the problems of our world. Thank you for watching Faith to Faith, the place that leads to greater understanding. The New York Board of Rabbis would like to thank Marilyn and Marty Metz for their generous support. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik. Thank you for watching Faith to Faith on JBS.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.